The following program is in no way intended to replace your doctor's advice or treatment program, nor should it be used as a tool for the purpose of self-diagnosis.
Welcome to our first edition of Your Health, Your Choice for 2019. Today we're going to be looking at 13 medical reasons for being overweight. 13 medical reasons for being overweight, especially appropriate after the Christmas vacation where most of us might have been overindulging. So apart from the obvious reasons for overweight being lack of adequate exercise and nutritious food, real food. We want to look again, as we start with Dr. Claude Khan,
good to be here.
Community diabetologist. Welcome back to 2019, Your Health, Your Choice, and 13 reasons, medical reasons, apart from diet and exercise.
Yeah. So I thought we'd kick off the year talking about this because, again, overweight or obesity is a worldwide problem. And here in Trinidad, it's no exception.
Would you say it's reached epidemic proportions in Trinidad?
Well, of course, obesity mirrors the prevalence of diabetes, hypertension, and what we call the metabolic syndrome. So has it reached epidemic proportions? Well, in the US at least, they're saying over 50% of the population are in the overweight category. So when we talk about overweight, we're talking about body mass index.
Right.
Now, we can also talk about waist circumference, which is some people think a more accurate marker, gauge. But body mass index is basically your weight in kilograms over your height in meters squared. So a BMI of between 20 to 25 is ideal, although certain ethnic groups, we have a lower cutoff point, especially the Indian population, Indo-Caribbean population, we say 23. 25 or 26 to 30 is overweight, above 30 is obese.
And what about the Afro-Trinidadian?
Well, so between 20 to 25 is ideal, above 25 is overweight. But bear in mind, in the Afro-American, African, Afro-Trinidadian, or the West Indian population, there's more muscle mass. So you just can't look at somebody's weight. What you have to look at is the body build and the muscle mass. So the reason we chose this, Linda, is that, you know, there's often very much a blame game. People feel guilty about being overweight. And what we're trying to do today by kicking this program off is to show that being overweight is a much more complex problem than people think.
Yes. Well, there are 13 of them to go through, so I hope we have enough time to get through all 13.
Yeah.
What would you like to look at the first one?
Right. So we're gonna in a few seconds bring up a slide, and this is the thyroid gland. So the first slide is showing you the thyroid gland. That's the neck, and the thyroid gland is just under the as you go into the neck area. If we could just come off that slide so I can. So it's just this area right here. That's where the thyroid gland is. And when we are examining the thyroid gland as doctors or healthcare professionals, really you should do it from the back. So we go behind the patient and we use both to palpate the gland to see if there are any, it's swollen, if there are any nodules, etc.
Right.
Now we can do a whole program on
hypothyroidism
and hypothyroidism, but what we're talking about today is more hypothyroidism, which is an underactive thyroid. So the question is, what does the thyroid gland have to do with weight?
Yeah.
Well, the two hormones produced from the thyroid gland, T3 and T4, thyroxine, that's basically the metabolic engine. So if you have an overactive thyroid, you can become overactive, you have palpitations, you feel nervous, you could have tremors. An underactive thyroid is where the metabolism slows down. And you can have things like hair loss, weight gain, constipation, etc. Now, I want to be very cautious here because a lot of people put down their weight gain to an underactive thyroid, and but it's an easy blood test to do, and we can do a blood test. But even if you have an underactive thyroid, so let me just say, you may have an underactive thyroid, and we may say that's the problem. But you know, you need to look at your whole life. I mean, when we're talking about a weight problem, even if you pick up the fact that you have an underactive thyroid, you shouldn't just say that's the total cause, because as you will see, there are other
12 other reasons.
Yeah, there are overlapping reasons. So it's an easy problem, and in fact, hypothyroidism is often linked to there's a relationship between diabetes and hypothyroidism, and it's an easy problem to treat. Hypothyroidism is easier to treat than hyperthyroidism, because when you have an overactive thyroid, you can either go for radioactive iodine, or there are tablets like carbimazole, different medications, or you can even, so the radioiodine is one way of treating it. So that's a more complex problem. But we're talking about weight problems.
Yes.
And so an underactive thyroid is one of the things that we should be looking at.
Okay, so that's the first one, hypothyroidism.
Hypothyroidism.
Secondly, we've got depression.
Right.
I think we have a slide that sort of reflects that.
So there's a slide, slide 2. So we see someone in a kind of darkened room, head in his hands, and it's a male. It's a man. Well, it looks like a man. And I make that point very, very intentionally.
So depression can bring on weight gain.
Right. So but let's just talk about depression a little bit, Linda, because you know it's often a hidden problem, and depression is often associated. Well, maybe I'm being chauvinistic here, but depression is often associated more with females than males.
Because of our hormonal changes.
Well, because of, and we will talk about the menopause as one of the reasons for weight gain. So many people, first of all, will not identify the fact that they're depressed, because the typical idea of someone who's depressed, and you know, in Trinidad, again, as a society, we are not very comfortable talking about our emotions
and mental health.
Right? So we know a lot of women after pregnancy, postpartum depression is a real problem, and it's an often unspoken problem because there's often guilt associated with the fact that you have a newborn baby, you should be happy, you should be bubbly, but we know that postpartum depression is a big problem. Especially in the culture or the present economic climate in which we are living. Many people are losing jobs. And, you know, for a man, in particular, if you have been the breadwinner, and the way we are built as men, it's probably a testosterone thing.
To be the provider.
Right.
Yes. And so if you lose that sense of purpose of being the provider, you can go into depression. You can go into, and then put on weight.
Right. So why? Why do you put on weight? Well, depression is associated very often with a stress hormone that we'll mention several times called cortisol. And cortisol is associated with laying down fat. So it's like when you're under a lot of stress as well. People who are under a lot of stress, yes, they may overeat, but their body's producing a lot of cortisol. And so when you're depressed, it's a vicious cycle. You don't want to exercise. You want to stay at home, as that clip showed. It was a darkened room, head in his hands.
You don't want social contact.
Right, so you withdraw, less activities, and you tend to eat more. So there's a comfort eating aspect. But what I'm saying is that...
And is it that you're drawn to eating certain kinds of foods when you go into that state?
Well, there are some people that having sugary foods can give you a high, serotonin or dopamine, as we often talk about. Yes, so some sugary foods can give a sort of a hormonal high. So yes, you might be drawn more to carbs, sugary foods. So people suffering with depression, the last thing they need is to go into a healthcare professional or their family members making fun of them because they're already because of the weight problem.
Yeah.
And so while we talk about obesity, we talk about being overweight, and we want people to lose weight, we need to do that in a very sensitive way.
Yeah.
So the depression, people who are looking at us tonight, you might recognize some of the features: loss of hope, hopelessness, loss of joy.
But it would be a change of personality as well, wouldn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
If you're normally the kind of person who engages in certain activities and suddenly withdraws from those, or you've lost, as you say, your joy.
Yes.
People closest to you would notice that.
Right. So that's where family members come in very, very importantly. The problem is we often don't understand depression, and somebody may lack motivation or be unhappy, and the response to that might be, oh, pull yourself together.
Yeah. And often too, when we've counseled with people in that situation, we found that there's a sense of denial as well.
Right.
Not wanting to accept that you are indeed having a period, a low period, and you may need mechanisms put in place to help you come out of that. So like positive self-talk and so on. And of course, exercise is going to help. Right.
So again, there's that vicious circle, because if you're depressed, you feel less likely to exercise, less inclined to exercise. But exercise in itself can release positive hormones that can help with weight loss, but can also help with your mental health, sense of well-being, and of course seeing a therapist.
Yes.
Again,
and if you say that to a lot of people, you need to see a therapist to work this out. And usually the men are the ones who say, no, not me.
Right. And the common response is how can talking to someone help me? I get that feedback from people all the time. And the fact is, talking is therapeutic.
It is.
So, people, and that can, in fact, on one of our WhatsApp sites, I was noticing today that people were saying that it was good to share some of the emotions. People were sharing some of the emotions of remembering someone who had passed away some years ago, and someone who's a teacher has gone back out to school, and some of his students have lost family members over the holidays. So it was a little bit of a somber mood. But the fact that the people on that site, we were sharing those emotions. So it's therapeutic.
Remember when British Telecom used to carry that ad, it's good to talk.
Right.
And they played on that whole philosophy that it's therapeutic to speak to each other, whether it's on the phone or face to face.
Right.
And confession, I guess.
Well, confession does help, and offloading some of the negative images, poor self-esteem, etc. So we are saying that depression is a hidden reason for being overweight. It's one that we need to talk about a little bit more. It has to do with the stress hormones. And, if you this last one, if you find that you have lost the joy in doing things that you normally enjoy doing, it might be playing a sport, it might be going to church, it might be
hanging out,
going to movies, whatever. You suddenly lose that joy of doing all those things. You might be depressed. And can I say, and closing off on this particular area of depression, unfortunately, even within our faith communities, depression is often denied. So people come to church, and I've been probably guilty of this as a pastor. I might see someone not participating as much as I want to in the worship or whatever, and you think, oh boy, that person is not spiritual enough, when in fact
they're going through depression. And the weight is an indicator.
Yes. So putting on weight is associated with depression. It's one of the medical causes.
So we've done two of the medical causes of being overweight: hypothyroidism, depression. Let's move on to the third one, which is insomnia.
So we have the third slide coming up, insomnia. And of course, there's two people. The man is happily sleeping, and the woman is, her eyes are wide open, staring and unable to sleep. So we want to talk about insomnia a little bit. So this again is a hidden problem. We don't think of lack of sleep as being one a factor in people putting on weight. But lack of sleep can mess up our circadian rhythm. It's called a circadian rhythm. There are certain times of the day when our body produces more of certain types of hormones than others. And if your body is not getting... We often say that the optimal sweet spot in terms of sleep is between 6 to 8 hours.
8 hours, yeah.
Now, I have to say, I very rarely get 6 hours.
I know that.
Right. After how many years of marriage? We wouldn't say that on TV. But yes, but I have survived, hopefully, probably giving people stress around me.
Well, you're not putting on weight, so
Right.
that's one good sign.
That's one good sign. But I wouldn't say I'm an insomniac, but I sleep for 4 hours at a time. I would get up.
So let's define insomnia then.
I mean, insomnia is people who find difficulty falling asleep, or people who would fall asleep and after an hour or two would get back up and they're unable to fall back to sleep. And their mind might be racing, they might be thinking about things during the day. And I have lots of patients who come in and they simply, and these are sometimes people even in their 30s and 40s. So, we know stress and worry and anxiety, all those things. But why does insomnia cause it? Well,
fat gain, yeah.
Well, if you're not sleeping well at night, again, your stress hormones are going to go up, and cortisol again.
Yeah.
So if you're getting up at 2, 3 in the morning, invariably, you might get up and you're wandering around the house and you're hungry. So you go into the cupboard and you, going for sugary drinks again, chocolates, etc. So between 6 to 8 hours is the optimal sleeping time. Now, what I would say is that we need to look at, people are different. So some people may sleep for 4 hours and get up and do stuff and go back to sleep, or like myself, I thrive on having a power nap during the day. I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that most days, and that is able to revive me. But insomnia is one of the things that, and it's not an easy problem to treat.
Yeah.
And in fact, I am convinced, I've not done a lot of research on this, but I'm convinced that insomnia often runs in family lines.
Okay.
So very often you'd find a mother or father, and then the children, it goes. And
one of the very good devices that we now have is that Fitbit, which actually monitors the number of hours you sleep, the REM, the deep, and I forget what the third one is, but it's an excellent chart for you to gauge, because I never really associated insomnia with weight gain.
Right.
But we're about to close off have our first break. When we come back, we'll be looking at the 10 other reasons, medical reasons for being overweight. Don't go away. Welcome back to Your Health, Your Choice, and this is our first program for 2019. And as you can see in the screen below you, we're looking at the 13 medical reasons for being overweight, especially after the overindulgence of the Christmas celebrations. So we've examined so far 3 of them: hypothyroidism, depression, and insomnia. And what was interesting to me was that connection with sugar and carbs in the last 2. But I know there's a clip you want us to have a look at. So
this clip is not really going into the 13 medical reasons, but it's giving you an overview of people who are struggling with being overweight. And it's a nice clip. So let's go to the clip and then we'll come back.
I was a skinny kid from ages 0 to 12. I was always outside running around pretending I was an animal and playing on my trampoline. But from 13 up, I started putting on weight. At first, it was barely noticeable, but as the years passed and I discovered the internet and not going outside, I slowly became more and more overweight. Not to mention my family was no help. My father would feed me only McDonald's when I would go over to his house. Being a 14-year-old, of course, I had zero objection to this because my mother never let us have fast food, so I'd happily eat 16 chicken nuggets. It didn't help that my love for the internet spiked around this time. I discovered gaming and role-playing forums for my favorite things, even IMVU. I'll make a video about IMVU in the future because, God, I had a lot of cringe things happen to me on that game. I was actually really fit as a kid, large part in due to my trampoline I was constantly running around and playing on until I got older and preferred to spend my time on Feral Heart, another game that I will make a video about because it was 80% of my preteen teen years. As I continued to fall more and more in love with the online world, my diet got worse and worse. When I was 16, I got my own car and my own money. So you know your girl spent her money on the snacks she was never allowed to have when she was a kid. When you're a child starved of the best spicy snacks, of course you're going to go ham and buy as much as you can. Honestly, I would go to the store and bring home 2 bags full of just junk food and hide them places in my room. Not to mention, during this time, I didn't have a desk, so I would just sit on my bed with my laptop and eat Cheez-Its for 5 hours. And over these years, I gained considerable weight, going from my size 2 to my size 13. I also hated sports and exercise, so as you can imagine, I became overweight. I was by no means obese, and I'm still nowhere close. Thankfully for me, I didn't care what the other kids thought of me, and growing up in small-town America, there were many other kids much larger than I was. And one saving grace I had was that I never liked soda. Still don't. Soda has such high sugar content, honestly, if any of the viewers out there are watching this and struggle with weight problems, cut the soda out. You will notice a huge change. Had I drank soda when I was in my fat stage, I probably would have ended up being obese. Even diet soda is bad. Put the soda down, Timmy. Put it down. Had I been this weight and not had fat shaming happen to me, I don't think I would have gotten up to 180 pounds at 17. Listen, I'm not trying to be preachy before you write in the comments that I'm a Tumblr psychopath who thinks it's okay to be 900 pounds, because I don't. But I also think it's never okay to make fun of someone who's struggling with weight issues, be that underweight or overweight. When I was little, my family had a big part in shaming me for my growing waistband. My sister would love to tell me that I was looking fat or getting fat, but at the time she was so little, I suppose it was a child's way of trying to help. My mother constantly compared me to herself and how she was a size 0 at my age, but my father did the worst. Boys don't like fat girls. I'll never forget that line, said to me so haphazardly without thinking about the long-term consequences of saying that to a young girl, struggling with self-image and her love of Cheetos. I remember feeling a bit sad and looking down at my large thighs. My father continued to repeat this pattern throughout the years. I just ignored it after the first 3 times. Had I been any other person, I think I would have developed an eating disorder from the constant scrutiny. From an early age, I learned not to care what other people think of me, and I'm truly thankful for that trait. Of course I care somewhat, we all do. Social pressure to be loved by all, but I realize not everyone will like me, and that's okay. It sucks when your parents are calling you fat, but I dealt with it and got through it. I'm still overweight to this day, but I'm doing better by eating less snack food and cutting out fast food completely. If you're struggling with your weight, just know it's okay to have a few extra pounds. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of yourself, but if you're eating yourself into a coma every day, it's not okay. Try your best to change your diets to fruits and veggies when you can. Make a smart choice when your mother asks you what you want from McDonald's. Get the salad with half the dressing. Order water instead of soda. Not only will you feel better about yourself, your insides will thank you. Personally, dieting doesn't work. I've spoken to nutritionists in the past, and they've all told me it's okay to be overweight as long as you're eating healthy as much as you can. It's entirely possible to be healthy at 180 pounds. Now, if you're 900 pounds, just eating healthy won't be enough, but I've seen enough of the Biggest Loser episodes to know when it's possible to lose weight if you really want to. And before we end this video, I'm going to go ahead and diffuse the hate comments because I know they're coming. Yes, I draw myself skinny, but does any animator really draw themselves how they look? I'm pretty sure James isn't a marshmallow with no hands in real life, so don't come for me. Anyway, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. See you in the next one.
Okay, so that was quite a good, refreshing youth perspective on weight gain and about, you know, the youth culture of fat shaming and body image issues and so on.
So, I mean, didn't really go into what actually we're talking about today, but it did give, as you're saying, a perspective on someone's own response to putting on weight and why so many of our kids are putting on weight because they're getting into the whole internet online games, less exercise. And unfortunately, in her case, her family was not very sympathetic. Her father was probably trying to be helpful, but not very sensitive.
Yeah. And that can have long-term consequences. We know
absolutely,
this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for all the fathers out there who, you have daughters, remember you are the first man in your daughter's life. And your daughter often looks to you for her self-esteem and for positive words. And I probably go overboard with that, but anyway.
It's okay, I compensate.
Right. So it's very important for us as parents to speak positive words into the lives of our children.
Yeah. But the thing about helping the person identify whether they are putting on weight or not, and monitoring, I think even as teenagers, when we have teenagers, we do need to monitor how much time are they spending on social media, in a sedentary lifestyle? Are they getting physical exercise? Are they eating enough fruit and vegetables? Are they drinking too many fizzy drinks with all that sugar in it instead of water? Those are still things that we need to monitor, even as they are teenagers. But, you don't have to do the fat shaming thing.
Right.
So we've covered hypothyroidism, depression, insomnia, and now we move on to menopause as the fourth of the 13 medical reasons for being overweight. So
the fourth slide, which is just a picture of a female.
Menopausal.
Does she look menopausal?
Well, usually at that age, I think you have the onset. Some people have early onset menopause, and some people, it can range. I've been told from 2 years to 12.
So you go into the perimenopausal period where your estrogen levels begin to fall. Of course, bear in mind that some people may have a premature menopause if you have had a surgical, it's called you can have a surgical menopause where you have a hysterectomy, your ovaries were removed, your uterus was removed, and then the ovaries may have been removed as well. Sometimes the ovaries are preserved. And then you can have a premature menopause where, because of various conditions, you're thrown into an early menopause in early 40s or whatever. Typically, the age of the menopause is roughly from about 48 to 52. But some people may start having symptoms, hot flushes, insomnia, irritability, depression, etc.
So it's all connected to the previous ones that we've looked at.
Right. And with the estrogen levels falling, what happens is that, again, you tend to put on weight around the tummy area. So
I was told that with the estrogen and the progesterone that fat cells tend to be associated with the estrogen and not with progesterone. I'm not sure if that's an accurate medical...
Right. So I'm not going to comment on that. I'll have to do some more reading on that. But definitely the drop in the estrogen levels do result in laying down of fat around the tummy area. So, there are some people, when you look at your photos when you were 18 or 19, and you get to your mid-40s. Now, bearing in mind, too, that your metabolism is slowing down. Your metabolism is changing. So things that you would have been able to eat when you were 18 or 19 and not put on weight, this goes for men and women, you get to your 40s, 30s, and 40s, and you start putting on weight. Now, bear in mind, too, everybody's metabolism is different. So, you take two people and some, one person can eat absolutely badly and they will not put on any weight, and another person just has to look at a dessert or look at the doubles and roti and they say that they'll put on some weight. So it's unfair. We don't know why. Well, we do know that genetics, there's definitely a genetic link. You look at family lines. If the parents are overweight, the children are much more likely to be overweight. And that's something that we probably was not going to mention. So genetics has a big part to play in people's in weight problems. But the menopause, So, how do you deal with that? Well, in years ago, hormone replacement therapy was very popular, but that's become less popular now because of some of the side effects of hormone replacement therapy. I know the alternative practitioners and herbalists, they have lots of products that they say does help with the menopausal symptoms. I'm not going to comment today either way on that. I think people have to make a decision whether they want to try any of those products. But coming back to healthy eating, and exercise, and but some people do go through a horrendous menopause, and I think if you're going through that a period of time, if you're married, your spouse has to be very, very, very
sensitive,
very, 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 very sensitive,
patient,
and understanding, and patient, and kind. And a lot of men, we used to joke about a male menopause, but there is something called the andropause, again, where testosterone levels fall. That's a different story for another day. But in terms of the menopause itself,
and overweight,
and yes, and of course, weight is, if we talk for women, body image is maybe even a bigger. I mean, you might comment on that. It's a bigger issue for women and probably men.
Yeah, I mean, women tend to be more focused on self-image. Although, we've got these, men who call themselves metrosexuals.
Metrosexuals.
And so I think body image generally has become that much more of an issue for people. And we have all these clinics coming up now with body sculpting for males and females.
Yes.
So, I guess it's based on what your ideal of beauty is, and what we've been brainwashed into thinking is an acceptable ideal for a body image. But that's just number 4, menopause bringing on weight gain. What about number 5?
So this is a less common condition. It's this is a big medical condition. It's called Cushing's disease, and there's a image here of somebody. Well, that's the tummy area. So you see the fat being put on, and basically it's again the stress hormone cortisol. So we can just come off that, and it's basically the adrenal glands producing too much cortisol, and it's a small growth that can be operated on. But I actually think, Linda, we miss a lot of people with Cushing's syndrome or Cushing's disease because we don't often measure cortisol levels. I have taken to measuring cortisol levels a little bit more in my daily practice because I'm seeing a lot of people with diabetes, and a lot of people with diabetes are also overweight, and we could be missing people with Cushing's. So you have what is called a round moon face. You have these purplish marks on the body.
So it should be quite easy to diagnose.
Well, in the extreme condition, extreme situations, the limbs might be quite thin, so you might have a fat, a lot of weight around the tummy with very thin legs and a round kind of moon face, and sometimes a little bit of a hump at the back. It's well, it's the textbook description is quite easy to diagnose, but in real life, when patients are coming into us, they often will not present with all of that. But again, we're repeating this hormone cortisol, and it's a hormone that is often not talked about a lot, and I think it's one, especially people who are overweight, we should be measuring a lot more.
And what are the treatments for Cushing's
disease? You can have an operation, it's a surgery, or you can have chemotherapy or radiation, or you have drugs that can lower cortisol levels.
What is the surgery? Where is the surgery taking place?
It's the adrenal gland, and but it's you have to diagnose it. So an MRI scan, for example, may be able to diagnose, may be able to show if there's a growth on the adrenal glands, and but you can also measure cortisol levels to see if cortisol levels are high.
So that's number 5. And number 6, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's another medical condition that will contribute to overweight.
Well, so we're going to bring up this slide 6, polycystic ovaries. And we see, well, this is an ultrasound, and we have the uterus, and we have the ovaries.
And the 2 yellow circles are identifying.
Right. Those are the ovaries with cysts on the ovaries.
Okay.
And these are polycystic ovaries. So we can come off that slide. So why is this so important? Well, I want to be very intentional how I describe this, because many young females are being told that they have polycystic ovaries or they have polycystic ovarian syndrome. And they're being placed on the oral contraceptive pill because there are some types of pills. But basically the cysts in the ovaries produce male hormones, androgens.
The androgen.
So what do you have with people with...
I think that's what I was referring to earlier, where the fat cells seem to increase with androgen. And
yes.
Yeah. So that's why women...
That's right. Okay.
In the menopausal period.
Because the estrogen levels are falling, and the progestogen levels are higher than the estrogens. So what happens in this condition? Some of the other symptoms are excessive hair growth, acne, and weight gain. Because with polycystic ovaries, your body becomes more insulin resistant. That's why people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, there's a link between PCOS and diabetes.
Okay.
So PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. What happens is that your body begins to produce too much insulin because your body is resistant, and insulin is actually, that's why when we put people on insulin who are diabetic, they tend to put on weight because the body begins to utilize your sugar more effectively. So insulin is actually a weight-gaining drug, unfortunately.
Oh, dear. Right, but there's a new one on the market that helps you
new drugs, yes.
New drug, okay. Right, so we've done 6 of the 13, and we're moving to our second break. When we come back, we're going to try and rush through the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's how many? It's 30, And so don't go away. Come right back for the other reasons why we put on weight, which are medically related and not necessarily to do with diet or exercise. Welcome back and Happy New Year. This is our first program of Your Health, Your Choice for 2019. And today we're looking at the 13 medical conditions that may cause overweight. We've examined 6 of them so far, so we've got 7 more to go. Just a quick synopsis of the ones that we have covered. We did hypothyroidism, depression, insomnia, menopause, Cushing's disease, and polycystic ovarian syndrome. So there's now congestive heart failure.
So we can bring up slide 7, which is just simply a slide of the heart.
Yeah.
And the heart seems to be okay there, but congestive heart failure. So we could just come off that slide. People might be surprised that we are saying that heart failure can cause weight gain. But why? It's because basically the heart is not pumping blood around the body sufficiently well, and the body begins to retain fluid. So you can get swollen feet, swollen ankles. There's fluid buildup sometimes in really advanced situations. Buildup of fluid in the tummy area, ascites, and also pulmonary edema. Now, I don't want to put this as a major cause because this is a major medical problem, congestive heart failure. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. But it is something to take into consideration, especially if you're getting more shorter breath. But this comes on more people in their 60s and 70s, or people who have had myocardial infarction and the heart muscles are damaged and the heart cannot pump blood around the body sufficiently well, and you can end up with congestive heart failure.
And overweight.
and overweight,
okay,
yes.
Number 8, sleep apnea?
So this is a big one, sleep apnea. And I'm going to bring up slide 8.
Would that be connected with insomnia?
Well, I'll come back to that. So we see here in this case, the woman is sleeping. I don't know if she has her hand to her ear.
Yeah, it looks like she's blocking it out.
Both, and man is sleeping presumably very soundly, but his mouth is open and he's obviously snoring.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about sleep apnea. So we used to think about snoring as just a very irritating symptom and can break up relationships and cause people to
move into another room,
yeah. etc. But we actually now know that snoring can be a symptom of what we call obstructive sleep apnea. And this is a much more serious medical condition than people think, because sleep apnea, so what happens is that the airways collapse and actually get cut off intermittently during the night, and you can have a very fitful sleep. So you're sleeping.
Does that mean that you're not having oxygen going to your brain?
Right, yes. Yeah. And that can even trigger horrific nightmares and, but basically what you find that during the day, you're getting up on a morning not feeling refreshed and you're tired during the day, and some people, are driving and they're falling asleep. And that's a big, really, really dangerous problem. Now, the problem is often not tested for. We as healthcare professionals, we often do. There's actually what is called a CPAP questionnaire that you can ask patients. Do they snore? Of course. Do they find themselves feeling drowsy during the day? And there are about 8 or 9 questions that you can give a score.
But you won't be able to tell if you're snoring. Somebody else needs to. Because I remember, in the early days telling you, yeah, you do snore and you're denying it.
So we're revealing that I have, right. So I was there. So,
and it was only when I recorded it. And you
recorded it?
I recorded it.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah, wife.
Then you believed me.
Yes, okay. Yes, because you don't often know that you're snoring.
No.
And of course, the interesting thing about this is that, yes, the more weight you have, you are more likely to suffer with sleep apnea. So it's a vicious cycle. People who suffer with sleep apnea tend to put on weight, but if you're overweight, you also suffer with sleep apnea. Now, I have lost quite a bit of weight since my diagnosis of colon cancer last year, which I hasten to add was very successfully dealt with. And if you have never had a colonoscopy, let me start off the new year by saying if you're over 45, male or female, you should have a colonoscopy every 5 years or so.
That's good for the weight as well.
Right.
Check. Yeah.
But the common fallacy is that people think you have to be very overweight to suffer with sleep apnea. I was never extremely overweight, yet, so it was something to do with my airways. And it's only later on I found out my eldest brother has suffered with sleep apnea for years. He lives abroad, but he travels around the world. He travels a lot with a machine, a little CPAP machine, and that has helped him.
That's one thing, but the sleeping position is also key to.
So one is diagnosing sleep apnea, which is, and if you need more information about all of this, our numbers are up. It's 482-4269. We don't do the testing, but we can refer you to a very good company called Island Sleep Diagnostics, and they can actually bring the equipment home and you sleep with it for 2 nights, and they can download the information. So in the old days, you had to go to a sleep lab, and sleep overnight and all that. It's become much more sophisticated. And but can I just say the sleep apnea problem is not just a weight problem. It's related to diabetes, heart disease, congestive heart failure, etc. So treating sleep apnea is not just treating the weight problem.
Yeah, but the weight problem seems to be connected to so many other diseases.
Right, yes.
Okay, let's move on quickly to edema. That's number 9.
Right. So edema, so let's just show this slide 9.
Oh yeah, swollen feet.
Swollen feet. So, so the feet are just swollen, and people are often worried about this. So we can just come off that slide. Now, edema can be a feature of heart failure, can be a feature of kidney problems, kidney failure, or even liver failure. But very often, some people seem just to retain fluid. And at the end of the day, their feet are very puffy. They elevate the leg at night, and the swelling goes down. Now, yes, you should do, someone who comes in with edema, you should do some basic blood testing, probably send the patient for an echocardiogram and some basic tests. But very often we don't find the cause. And you can put some people on mild diuretics, water tablets, to try and deal with the fluid retention. With the edema. Yeah, but I have to say I'm very cautious about putting young people on diuretics because you don't want people to be on diuretics lifelong. Right.
So losing that extra fluid reduces the weight.
Reduces the weight.
Okay, number 10, metabolic syndrome.
So metabolic syndrome. So again, I think we only have about 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes. Yeah. So I'll do metabolic syndrome, and the next slide is diabetes. So I'll just bring up the right.
So they're connected.
Let's just talk about metabolic syndrome and diabetes. So what is the metabolic syndrome? So it's again, the question is, does diabetes make you put on weight, or does weight bring on diabetes?
Yeah.
And this is the big
chicken and egg situation.
Right. So sometimes we definitely know that if you put on weight, especially around the tummy area, that's one of the features of the metabolic syndrome. The other features are hypertension, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. So there are about 5 symptoms: the waist circumference above a certain level, high triglycerides, high blood pressure, high blood sugar. All those things lead to the metabolic syndrome. Diabetes in itself can be associated with weight loss or weight gain. Yeah. And the thing about diabetes is that very often when we put people on medication for diabetes, it can make them put on weight.
More weight, yeah.
And why is that? Because before you're diagnosed with diabetes, you're eating and your body's you're literally urinating out calories. And when we put you on medication, especially insulin therapy, you can put on weight. Now, I just want to say that some people need insulin. There's no doubt about that. But we now have some new classes of drugs, like the DPP-4 inhibitors and the SGLT2 inhibitors, things like Invokana, Forxiga, and we're waiting on what we call the GLP-1 agonists, things like Victoza and exenatide, etc. And
is this on the public health care system?
No way.
This is all private.
I have to say, just saying on that, I returned to the Southwest recently after a long layoff, and I have to say I was very frustrated today because again we are very, very limited. And patients were saying, well, how can I get my blood sugars down? I'm on insulin, I'm on metformin, I'm on sulfonylureas, and my blood sugars are still high. And unfortunately, I have to say to them, can you afford to buy any of the new drugs?
And I understand that Januvia is no longer available.
Well, it was never available. We begged for it. We begged for it. We asked the Ministry of Health, give us just one of the DPP-4 inhibitors. And again, we're coming to the end of this program very quickly. If the Ministry of Health and the advisors around the Ministry of Health, the Chief Medical Officer, they can understand if we pump money into the newer drugs, we can help defer the huge economic burden on the healthcare system as a result of people needing dialysis, going into heart failure, needing bypass surgery, amputations. So it's a very short-term view to say that we can't provide some of these newer drugs.
Yeah. So we've looked at metabolic syndrome and diabetes. We have 2 more to go and we'll hit our 13.
12 and 13.
Steroids.
So let's just show 12 and then 13.
Common medications.
Common medication. So I know we only have about maybe about five or 6 more minutes. Steroids. Definitely long-term steroids can cause weight gain. And I always say to my patients, bearing in mind that most of my patients are diabetics, if they have gone to other doctors and they have received injections, please ask your doctor what injection you're getting, especially those of you with asthma. you might be getting steroid injections. Now, a one-off steroid injection is not a problem, but you know, sometimes people go in just with a common cold or you know, a flu-like symptoms, and by giving a steroid injection, people feel better. Steroids make you feel better.
Yeah.
It can almost be euphoric. But the problem with that is the side effects of steroid treatment is weight gain, and there's some other drugs. There's some beta blockers. Some of the oral contraceptive pills can make young girls put on weight. Some of the antipsychotics for psychiatric conditions can make you put on weight. Some of the antidepressants and drugs used for epilepsy can make you put on weight. So what I'm saying is that when someone comes in with a weight problem, before we put them on these fancy diets, the latest one is called the ketogenic diet, which is becoming very popular. Can I just say, I know we've covered a lot on medical conditions. Be very careful. A lot of patients are coming into me and they have been placed on these almost no-carb diets. Of course, if you go on a diet with no carbohydrates, you will lose weight, but it's not physiological. So many of the weight loss clinics we have in Trinidad are advising people that they should do away with all carbs. I want to say that's not medically advised. You need a little bit of carbs in your diet. You know, if you can't just have a little bit of rice, it could be brown rice or basmati rice, ground provision, yam, dasheen. So it's high in iron, a small amount, rather than the white flour and the white rice. So I want to debunk the myth of this.
You don't need carbs.
Right, and this ketogenic diet that is becoming very, very popular can actually be dangerous to your health. So all those weight loss clinics out there that are advising people to stay away. You know what happens, Linda? People lose weight and they're happy about it.
And it's a quick weight loss as well.
It's a quick weight loss. One of the things I preached at my the All Years Night was consistency is much better than intensity. So it is much easier to be intense for 4 weeks and lose 20 pounds, but you can't be consistent with that.
And I've noticed too that people who have those drastic weight changes usually can't sustain it. And then when you start putting on, you put on even more, and it's much more quickly. We need for you to move on to your
pastoral hat, because I know you wanted to end up with something. So as we end today, I know putting on weight is a problem, and Carnival is coming up in March, and a lot of people are going to be in the gyms trying to lose weight. Please get tested medically to make sure there are no medical conditions. You can ring us on 482-4269, 482-4269 for more information about what we talked about tonight. As I said, Linda, on All Years Night, I preached a sermon called "What Will Your Life Be Like in 5 years' Time?" Because for most of us, we were thinking about just 2019. And my challenge to the church from Romans chapter 13 was, are you wasting your time in things that are not worthwhile? And my challenge for you today is, don't just think for 1 year. Think about the next 5 years. How are you using your time? There's a Greek word called kairos, which is strategic time. You may very well be in a kairos moment in your life, and God might be saying things to you, and you need to take hold of that and be a better version of yourself. So change some of the old habits. If you're not exercising, start exercising. If you're not praying, start praying. If you're not reading the Word of God, start reading the Word of God. If you're not going to church, find a good place, find a good faith community. Or if you belong to another religion, you know, attend your faith community. It gives you hope. It gives you a reason for life. And the one I mentioned in the consistency rather than intensity. Be consistent at whatever God has placed in your life. And in 5 years' time, you might be surprised at what God has done in your life.
So it's not just about asking him, but it's also about action.
Action.
Yeah. So we're having a seminar on Saturday
yes.
For our leaders.
Workers and leaders in our church,
and
yes.
people who are leading different ministries at our faith community. And the topic is going to be the emotionally healthy leader. I just wanted to define, and in these global times where we're seeing so many bad examples of leadership, what is the emotionally healthy leader? So an emotionally unhealthy leader is someone who operates in a continuous state of emotional and spiritual deficit. So it's emotional as well as spiritual. He lacks or she lacks emotional maturity and a being with God sufficient to sustain his or her doing for God. So, being with God doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing what he requires of you as a leader. And I thought that was an interesting introduction to our seminar on Saturday.
Yes.
So you've been with us for our first of 2019's Your Health, Your Choice programming. We've looked at the 13 medical reasons for overweight. And we just want to continue to work with you in this educational community education drive for better and healthier 2019, a better nation, a healthier nation. Just keep viewing. We will be returning to our live programming once a month soon. But until then, I know this program is going to be aired again on Thursday at lunchtime and on Sunday night at 7 p.m. Your Health, Your Choice will return in a fortnight's time.